I'd now like to introduce you to the book Art of Design and give you a narrative context for how that book was put together, and I think it will help you understand what's going on when you read it. If we go back to World War II, the emphasis in war was on massive armies joining each other in battle toward winning large-scale wars with large forces. And the military at the end of World War II was prepared to fight those particular kinds of wars, but then things changed. We moved into the Cold War, which required its own type of warfare. And then through the development of conflict in the Middle East, there's been an emphasis on strikes, military strikes, where precision bombing, very effective striking of targets with intelligent weapons, that's been the focus of military action. And then after 9/11, there was a movement into a kind of warfare that is almost like our country, America, having to engage in guerrilla warfare with these hidden terrorist cells and the use of intelligence and whatnot. Even we see this in the recent killing of Osama bin Laden, this type of warfare being used. Well, throughout this recent history of warfare, there was a development of a paradigm, a very important, powerful paradigm called effects-based operations, effects-based operations, or EBO. And this approach to warfare emphasized approaching warfare in terms of creating certain effects. And the idea behind this philosophy of warfare was that, first of all, warfare occurs in the mind, right? You have two opponents fighting against each other, and the goal is to change the mind of the other opponent, right? So that they stop fighting. All war ultimately is aiming to affect the wills of the two forces that are engaged with each other. And it was thought that through targeting certain physical targets, that by destroying those targets, that would affect the mind, the will of the people fighting. And based on this metaphor, they went further to say that there were certain strategic relationships that people had, that if you targeted those networks, that you could actually change the way an enemy fought and even affect their mind. Okay. Now, as I describe this to you, this all probably sounds really neat, that we need to aim our mission toward creating a certain kind of effect. And stated that way, I guess in some way that's good, right? We should direct all of our strategy toward achieving some specific effect. But what we found, and you will see this in the article if you haven't read it already, what they found is that it doesn't work. War is not about blowing up things to affect people's brains, to affect people's minds and the way that they think about things, right? Sometimes the better thing to do is actually not to blow something up in order to affect the way somebody thinks. For example, if we look at the Muslim general Saladin, who ended up capturing the city of Jerusalem, Richard the Lionheart in battle had his horse killed from underneath him, right out from underneath him. And so Saladin actually gave Richard the Lionheart two of his best horses, just because that's what he thought was best. On another occasion, Richard the Lionheart was sick, and so Saladin sent his own physicians to take care of him. Right? Now, why was he doing this? Well, yes, we could say that's good PR, but he also understood that he was getting inside the mind of his enemy by showing him kindness. He was actually achieving something with this general he could not achieve on the battlefield. And then to be in battle with this man who treats you well and respectfully, it's, you know, just messed with Richard's categories, right? My point in sharing that story is that things aren't always achieved necessarily by blowing up targets. And effects-based operations, the style of approach that this philosophy of war gave us was exactly what you saw in the Second Gulf War with shock and awe, right? This is the approach that Donald Rumsfeld used in prosecuting the Second Gulf War, this fast attack, go in, blow things up, and this will change the mind of the Iraqi forces and will bring a quick end to the war. But what they did not do is plan for the second phase, which was having to deal with guerrilla conflicts, right, where these hidden groups were going to try to resist, and that's eventually where that war went. But my point is that this philosophy of EBO, effects-based operations, failed, as I described in the article. And right around 2008, through a lot of research that had been done on how to understand complex systems, there was a paradigm change in approaching complexity inside the military, based on wargaming and a lot of study on how it is that we come to understand how to deal with complex systems. And the textbook Art of Design is trying to solve this, trying to teach this new way of thinking. And what the book is trying to do is to show military commanders how to think through what's called the joint operational planning process, right? That's the Joint Forces name for it. But there's also an Army version of this as well. But the approach to planning where you're operating through the chain of command, where the Secretary of Defense gives orders to, you know, and on down it goes. That's sort of following, allowing the order to go through the chain of command. How does that engage with the need for individual commanders to think through on their own how to deal with a complex operational environment? The person way up on top who has who's giving the orders doesn't necessarily know what's going on the ground. So this book is designed to show people who are having to deal with real operational complexity. It's supposed to teach them how to think about that complexity so that they're actually able to achieve an order that's given to them inside of a complex, unpredictable operational environment. If you keep that in mind, then the book will make sense. Also keep in mind that the book is emphasizing how to think inside of that environment. It emphasizes metaphor and narrative, stories. How is it that you deal with an environment where the stories that you're receiving are changing? How is it that you deal with information on the staff where there are various social relationships where you're getting input from various people, but there are personal stakes in the counsel that you're receiving from various people you're speaking with? How do you evaluate that sort of counsel? This book is talking about all of that. So as you're reading the book and you come across terms like the JOPP, you know, the Joint Operational Planning Process, or you come across the names of certain manuals, realize that those texts that are being described are there for military officers to be able to connect what they're learning with other documents. But you'll also notice in the book that it will explain a principle and then talk about how it's applied in the military. But you'll see that the book is organically divided out so that it tries to separate the explanation of principles with the application of them in a military context. If you keep that clear, where you're thinking about principles and distinguishing those from the military application, then the military application will become a kind of illustration for you to be able to see what these principles are, and then you'll be able, in your own context and in the course, to think about how to apply them to your particular situation.